In this tutorial, you'll be learning how to cut and sew this ball dress without hardness to achieve this premium fullness. So let's go ahead and get started. So this dress was for my baby's dedication, and I actually planned to use the same George fabric I used for my own dress for hers, okay? But eventually I decided to just make hers an English dress, and so I changed the fabric to a Mikado fabric for the upper part and maintained the tulle for the lower part. So you can see my sketch already had my George fabric there on it. Okay, so I changed it and decided to use the Mikado fabric. So for the lower part, I decided to use tulle. Now I wanted this to be comfortable on her as well as very full. Okay, for me the fullness was a real thing, and so I got 4 yards of tulle for this. So at this point, I had already folded my tulle. I had 4 yards as I mentioned earlier. So at this point, you can literally say you're starting with the cutting of the skirt. So I folded the tulle the way you can see me folding this paper. Yes, my 4 yards of tulle, I folded it into four. Okay, so that is one yard, and then I went ahead to pin it round. So at this point, what you could see, you can see my pins on this, was my tulle already folded into four and pinned down, ready for cutting. So for this dress, I worked with measurements: length 16, shoulder to waist 6.5, shoulder 7, neck depth I did 2.25, neck width I did 2. Okay, my waist, or her waist, and her chest or bust were both 17, but for that I'll advise you to add 2. So if you get the 17, you add 2 inches for ease. Okay, and then for sleeve we had length 2.5 inches and circumference 6 inches. So for any circumference measurement you add ease. Okay, so we went ahead next to calculate certain things to achieve different parts of this tool. So of course, know that the tool is for the skirt part. So to get the length of the tulle I worked with, I went ahead to subtract the shoulder to waist from the full length. So shoulder to waist 6.5 inches from 16 inches. So 16 minus 6.5, and I had 9.5. Okay, so I decided to add 1 inch just in case we need to trim at the end, and of course half inch for attaching to the upper part. Okay, so that made everything 1 inch. So I added that 1 inch to my 9.5, and that made it 10.5 inches for the length of the skirt part. That is the two part of this dress. Okay, so you need to note that properly. Now to get the width, that is how wide our tulle net will be. Okay, I brought out the waist circumference. That waist circumference is round the waist of the dress. Okay, and for her I used the 17. Okay, then I added 1 inch for zipper on one side of the back, plus 1 inch for zipper on the other side of the back, which is 19. So as I already got into 19 and we're doing calculations, I just decided to round it off to 20. Okay, at most all you do is gather it back and get your tool. Okay, so I used 20 inches to calculate the width. Okay, you want to note that down. Now because we're working with gathers, you know that you need your waist to be way bigger than the actual width. Okay, the actual waist, which is the 20, it has to be way bigger, and then you put everything back to bring it back to that 20 by gathering your fabric, and that is how you create fullness for your tool. So I mentioned earlier that I was using 4 yards, and 1 yard is 36 inches. 36 inches times 4 is 144. Okay, now what we're describing again is the wideness or the width of this. Okay, or rather how wide this will be. So for this dress, instead of doing my gathers to be her waist, which is 20 that we're working with, times 3, I did 20 times 7. Okay, and that is why I used 4 yards of fabric. So 36 times 4 is 144. Okay, that's 1 yard times in 4 places. Okay, so I had this long strip of my 4 yards, 144. Okay, and then we cut each strip to be 10.5 inches long and 144 inches wide. Okay, so after getting that, I knew that if I gather the 144 inches back into this 20 that we are working with, our ball gown will be extra full. Okay. Now you want to note that the length of our tool per yard it was 65 inches. So whatever we have folded here is 144 inches wide by 65 inches long. That is for the tool. Okay, and for the actual baby's length, her waist is 20 that we're working with, including zipper allowances, by 10.5 inches long. Okay, for the skirt. So I went ahead to do further folding to make it even easier for us to cut this. Okay, so with tool you don't want to cut over long distances. You want to fold it and layer it as much as possible so that you can cut over short distances. So you can just see me here trimming excesses from this so that when we cut it will come out neat. Okay, and while you're cutting and folding, just make sure you hold down with pins. So I was doing all of that here. So if you're yet to subscribe to this channel, make sure you tap the subscribe button and turn on your notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. Okay, we are also on Instagram and Facebook at Style with Bloom, so feel free to join our community. Okay, so you can see how much I folded this so that everything is as short as possible. And I started taking out my 10.5 inches and marking it out. So I marked the first 10.5 and cut it out, and then I put the next 10.5 using the first one to cut. Okay, you can just see me repeating and cutting out the different layers of my tool. Okay, so for this you should have up to 6-7 layers of tool, which are each 140 inches wide and your 10.5 inches, depending on your own baby's length or whatever waist you are working with. Okay, but I use 4 yards, so if your own waist is bigger you can use even more. Okay, or if you want it fuller. So at this point I was done with the cutting. I went ahead to repeat the same steps on the lining. So for you, what you can do here is you can multiply that waist, which is 20 that we're working with, by 3 for the lining, or even 2. Okay, but it still has to be gathered. It's not supposed to be just straight. Okay, so you can multiply by 2, and then for your length you can remove up to 1 or 1.5 from that 10.5 so that it doesn't begin to show under the dress. Okay, you don't want it to be longer than your tool, you want it to be inside. Okay, now next part we cut were the flaps on top of the circle, as you can see in the sketch. So to cut these flaps, I folded the fabric into 4, as if you want to cut a peplum. Okay, I folded my fabric into 4 and I used the Mikado fabric for this flap. Okay, that's the fabric that I used on the upper part of the dress. So I used it on the flap. So I folded my fabric into 4. So I folded into 4, and then for my radius, I divided my waist into 2, or her waist into 2, which is 17 divided by 2, 8.5 divided by 4. Okay, so I got 2.125, and I used that for the radius. And then I used a length of 4, added half-inch allowance, and then I cut this out. Okay, so for the radius, divide the waist into 2 and then divide what you get into 4 and use it for the radius. Okay, and then start determine the length you want to use. Okay, and then I cut this into 2 for the both sides, so you can see that we had that. Next up, I went ahead to cut the lining pieces for this. So here I was just measuring to be sure that I had what I needed. So you can see I had my 8, in fact I had like 9 inches for each. Okay, so I knew it to go through what I wanted it to do. So here I went ahead to just shape this out so that my edges will not just end up straight. Okay, so that's how we got that point to be rounded at the front. Okay, for these are our flaps. I went ahead to shape it, so you draw out that mark like you can see me doing. So after that, I went ahead to cut this. Remember to add your allowance, okay? So you don't reduce your fabric too much, so you can add your allowance on this while you're cutting. Okay, so I just folded it and used what I had already cut to curve out the second side. So I had these two very cute pieces for each side of the dress. Okay, next off, I went ahead to cut the lining for each of them. After this part, the next part was to draft our half scale block, which is the upper part of this. So I already drew out a line with my paper. You can see how small this is. Now this paper is 6.5 inches long and any width that you want. Okay, so I took out from the shoulder line. This shoulder line is the start of the paper. I took out the 2.25 inches for neck depth and 2 inches for neck width, and then I divided her shoulder by 2 and added up on the shoulder line. So I connected my points. Now for my shoulder line, I came down by 0.75 for shoulder slants and I connected that. Her shoulder to chest was 5 inches, so from there I came up by 1 inch and I drew out her chest line. Okay, shoulder to bust, actually for them, it's chest. And then on that chest line I took her bust measurement divided by 4. Now on the waistline it was also the same thing, so I connected all my lines and then I just used my curve to connect from the shoulder slant to the chest line to form the arm hole or arm zaya. Okay, now I went ahead to cut this, but since I also wanted to use the same pattern to cut the back, I didn't cut the armhole originally on the line. Okay, the shoulder part too, I didn't cut it originally on the line. I gave about 0.25 inch extra paper. Now for the back, our neckline is 1 inch, so that's what you can see me marking there. So you can see me just describing the extra 0.25 inch on the armhole for the back armhole. Okay, and then I went ahead to draw our back neckline, neck depth, which is 1 inch. Maintain the same neck width. Okay, so I cut this out and we're done with pattern drafting. I went ahead to cut on lining and we're cutting the back first. So of course, if you're cutting your back first, you're adding your zipper allowance of 1 inch on the back. So that's what you can see me measuring out there. And then I added my side allowance of 1 inch and then half inch to the armhole, half inch to the shoulder, half inch to the neckline. Okay, so I cut this out. So if you're yet to subscribe to this channel, ensure that you click on the subscribe button and turn on your notification bell so that you can see other kiddies content like this. Okay, and so you don't miss out on videos when we put them up. Okay, so of course, that when you're cutting your back, you slit it open because of your zipper, and then you notch your zipper allowance. Okay, so it helps you even identify your back. Then I went ahead to cut that on the main fabric, and then we went ahead to cut out the front neckline and actually realign our pattern to our original front draft, and then we cut that on the fabric and lining as well. So I added my allowances the same way I did on the back. Half inch on the armhole, half inch on the shoulder, half inch on the neckline, and then I went ahead to also cut this. So for the front, I was already cutting on the main fabric. Just make sure you're cutting on both your main fabric and your lining. You need both of them. Half inch on the lower part as well. Okay. So we're back to our tool, and the next thing was to run a gathered stitch, that is a loose stitch, on the upper part of your tool from one side to the other along the width. So here I had already done the gathered stitch, and I had even gathered some. So if you watch closely, you see me showing you how to go ahead to draw out your gather. So after running your gathered stitch, you make sure that you don't lock your stitches, okay? You don't back stitch, and then you go ahead and pull on your thread. Okay, so you can see me, I had just run that gather stitch up there, pull on the thread, and then this will gather. So I had already done it on the lining and a portion of the tool that you could see on the table. Okay, so I did this for all my layers, and then I began to put them on top of each other and sew by 1/2 inch on top of the sewing machine. At this point, we had put all our layers on top of each other and sewn by 1/2 inch at the upper part. So you just place them on top of each other and sew until you have this huge ball dress already, okay, or ball skirt, okay. And then the next thing was to line our flaps. So I went ahead to place the lining and the fabric right sides facing each other and sew by 1/2 inch around it, okay, and then flip it to the right side. Next off, I went ahead to place the main fabric right sides facing each other with the back, that's the front and the back, and then we sewed the sides by the 1 inch we used for seam allowance, okay. So after doing that, you can see what I had here. I also went ahead to do the same thing on the lining and sew at the shoulder by 1/2 inch. So I have literally joined my back and front together for both the lining and the main piece. Then we put them again right sides facing each other after pressing, and then we went ahead to sew on the neckline. Okay, so you both the back and the front neckline were joined at the same time. This is called the inseam finishing, okay, or inseam finishing method. Yeah. You also go ahead and sew on the zipper area by 1/2 inch so that we can turn the lining. And for the flaps, you can go ahead and determine the midpoint of your ball gown, ball skirt part, and then come in by 1.5 inch on both sides before attaching each flap, okay. So 1.5 inch from your midpoint before you attach the flap for one side, and 1.5 inch from your midpoint to the other side to attach the flap. So you just sew it on top of your already layered tool, okay. So at this point I had done that, and you can see my skirt part was ready, okay, for this. So we had our skirt part for the main fabric, which is the tulle, ready, and then the lining skirt part ready as well. And we also had the upper part and the lining ready together. Okay, that's the half scale block. So you put both of them together at this point. So lining first, right side facing each other with the skirt part, like you can see me doing, and then you go ahead and sew by 1/2 inch to join it, okay. So just place it like you can see me doing, and sew by 1/2 inch from one side to the other, and then you flip that upper part to the other side and repeat the same process for the tulle. So you place the tulle net on top of the upper bodice like you can see me doing here, and just sew from side to side. Make sure it is right sides facing each other, okay. So you go ahead and fix your sleeves, whichever sleeve you choose to, and this is what I had at the end. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and subscribe to this channel. See you in the next. Thank you for watching.